9 months later, homeless woman's quadruplets make tech billionaire regret everything. 9 months after abandoning his pregnant wife, billionaire tech mogul Atticus Frost stood frozen in the rain, watching the 4 children he never knew existed laugh and play in the yard of a rundown shelter. His empire was worth billions, but he'd never felt more bankrupt than in this moment. For identical little girls with copper curls like their mothers, bundled in mismatched hand-me-downs, building a mud castle in the rain. For heartbeats he'd walked away from. For lives that existed because of him, yet thrived despite him. They say the most powerful man in tech never shows emotion. I'll tell you now. But as rain mingled with tears on Atticus Frost's face that day, the man who controlled the digital world with a keystroke couldn't even control his own trembling hands. Have you ever wondered what happens when a man who is everything discovers he is nothing that truly matters? What becomes of a woman who loses everything except the fierce love for her children? And what miraculous twist of fate could possibly reunite them? Today, I'm sharing the extraordinary story of how one woman's incredible strength and 4 tiny heartbeats brought the most powerful tech billionaire to his knees. A story about choices that can't be undone, consequences that can't be avoided, and a redemption so unlikely it would be unbelievable if it hadn't actually happened. Atticus Frost wasn't born into wealth. The son of a physics professor and an absent mother, he grew up in a world of equations and algorithms rather than emotion and connection. By 13, he'd built his first custom operating system. By 17, he'd received full scholarships to every elite university in the country. By 25, he'd revolutionized quantum computing and founded FrostCore Technologies. Success is just a series of correct calculations, Atticus often told reporters. Emotion is inefficient. This philosophy served him well in business. FrostCore's quantum security protocols transformed digital banking, healthcare, and defense systems worldwide. By 33, Atticus controlled the digital infrastructure powering half the world's secure communications. Forbes called him the Emperor of Encryption. The Wall Street Journal dubbed him the coldest mind in tech. Both were compliments in his world. But the algorithms that made Atticus billions failed him completely when it came to human connection. 3 executive assistants quit within a year. Board members respected his brilliance, but feared his ice-cold precision. He lived alone in a minimalist penthouse overlooking Seattle, surrounded by bleeding-edge technology but no personal photographs. No mementos. Nothing warm. Fiona Adair was Atticus's polar opposite in every way that mattered. Born and raised in Savannah, Georgia, she grew up in a home where family was everything. Her father, Patrick, taught history at the local high school for 40 years. Her mother, Margaret, turned their historic home into a bed and breakfast when money got tight. Their house was always full of laughter, music, and the smell of Margaret's famous peach cobbler. Fiona inherited her father's storytelling ability and her mother's creative hands. After studying textile design at SCD, she opened a small shop called Southern Threads on River Street. There, she sold her handcrafted quilts, embroidered linens, and custom textile art that told stories of Southern life in vibrant colors and intricate patterns. Every thread connects to another, Fiona would tell customers as her nimble fingers worked the loom. Just like every person connects to another. We're all part of one big tapestry. Her work celebrated connection, between generations, between traditions, between strangers. Her most popular pieces were memory quilts made from family clothing, transformed into heirlooms that kept loved ones close even after they were gone. Fiona's warmth drew people to her naturally. Her shop became a community gathering place. Tourists came for her art, locals came for her listening ear and genuine smile. She lived in a small apartment above her shop, surrounded by color, texture, and mementos from everyone she loved. If you've ever wondered how a single decision can completely alter the course of multiple lives, hit the like button and keep watching. Because when these 2 fundamentally different souls collided, neither would ever be the same again. They met during Savannah's annual River Street Festival. Atticus was there reluctantly, dragged by his college roommate who'd insisted he needed some actual sunshine after 3 years of nonstop work. Fiona was hosting a textile demonstration, showing children how to weave simple patterns on a small loom. "You're holding it too tightly," she said, noticing the tall stranger awkwardly attempting to help a frustrated little girl. Looms need gentle hands. Atticus looked up, startled by the interruption. I prefer precision to gentleness. They're not mutually exclusive, Fiona replied with a smile that reached her eyes. Here, let me show you. Her hands guided his, warm skin against cool, showing him how to balance tension with flexibility. The little girl beamed when her pattern finally took shape. Atticus found himself staring at Fiona's copper curls catching sunlight, the constellation of freckles across her nose, the way her green eyes crinkled when she laughed. For the first time in years, Atticus Frost felt something warm crack through his carefully constructed walls. He canceled his flight back to Seattle that night, and the next night, and the night after that. I've never seen anything like this, his astonished roommate told Fiona after Atticus stepped away to take a call. The man works 18-hour days. He's turned down meetings with presidents, but he's canceled an entire week of appointments to stay in Savannah. Their courtship was a collision of worlds. Atticus took her to five-star restaurants. Fiona took him to backyard cookouts. He showed her the elegant precision of code architecture. She showed him the beautiful chaos of creativity. He calculated. She felt. He planned. She flowed. Somehow it worked. You make the world make sense in a completely different way, Atticus told her on a moonlit night beneath Savannah's moss-draped oaks. Everything I built was binary. Ones and zeros, black and white. You've shown me infinite shades between. 3 months after they met, Atticus proposed beneath the ancient magnolia tree in the garden of Fiona's childhood home. The ceremony happened in that same garden 2 months later, simple, intimate, with fairy lights in the magnolia branches and Fiona's handmade lace adorning the tables. Their honeymoon was spent in a secluded cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. No internet. No phones. Just two people discovering each other in ways that transcended the physical. Promise we'll always find our way back to each other, Fiona whispered one night, her head on his chest, her copper hair spread across the pillow. I promise, Atticus said, kissing her forehead. It's a simple calculation. All paths lead back to you. But some promises are harder to keep than others, especially when the variables change. The first fracture appeared 3 months into their marriage. FrostCore was launching a revolutionary quantum encryption protocol, and Atticus needed to be in Seattle. It's just for a few weeks, he assured Fiona, kissing her goodbye at the Savannah airport. Once the system launches, I'll come home. Weeks became months. Video calls replaced embraces. Text messages replaced conversations. Fiona understood the importance of his work. She'd never want to hold him back, but the distance wore on them both. Meanwhile, Fiona's parents needed her in Savannah. Her father's arthritis was worsening, making it difficult for him to navigate the stairs in their historic home. Her mother was struggling to manage the bed and breakfast alone. And Fiona's shop was finally gaining national attention, with orders coming in from across the country. We need to decide where home actually is, Fiona said during one late-night video call, her face pixelated by poor connection. I can't leave my parents right now, and Southern Threads is finally taking off. Atticus, surrounded by multiple screens of code in his Seattle office, nodded distractedly. Once this launch is complete, we'll figure it out. The Seattle house is nearly renovated. You'll love it. But Fiona didn't want a renovated mansion in Seattle. She wanted her husband beside her, building a life together in the city she loved. 6 months into marriage, they were living separate lives. Atticus flew to Savannah 1 weekend a month. Fiona visited Seattle when she could leave the shop and her parents. Their time together became pressurized, too many conversations to have, too many decisions to make, too many feelings to process in too little time. The magnolia in Fiona's parents' garden bloomed and faded. Summer heat gave way to fall crispness. Fiona's mother noticed she was losing weight, the shadows under her eyes darkening. Marriage shouldn't make you disappear, sweetheart, Margaret said gently, watching her daughter stare at her phone, waiting for a call that was already an hour late. In Seattle, Atticus worked harder than ever. FrostCore expanded into artificial intelligence, digital security, and quantum computing research. His net worth tripled. He purchased the penthouse below his to create a combined living/working space. When he slept, which was rarely, it was usually on the office couch, surrounded by empty coffee cups and glowing screens. Their anniversary arrived. Atticus sent an enormous arrangement of flowers but canceled his trip to Savannah due to a system emergency. Fiona sat alone in their special spot under the magnolia tree, surrounded by blooms that couldn't replace her husband's presence. That night, she made a decision. She would move to Seattle. She would close Southern Thread's physical location and operate online only. She would find healthcare specialists for her father. She would sacrifice to save her marriage. Before she could tell Atticus, Frost Core announced a major expansion into international markets. Atticus would be traveling to Tokyo, London, and Singapore over the next 2 months. It's the opportunity of a lifetime, he told her, his face animated with rare excitement. Once these deals close, we'll be set for life. I'll have more freedom then. Fiona nodded and smiled, not telling him about the sacrifice she'd been prepared to make. Not telling him about the growing suspicion that had sent her to the doctor that morning. Not telling him about the blood test results she was waiting for. Some distances can't be measured in miles. The email from her doctor arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Fiona sat alone in her apartment above Southern Threads, staring at her laptop screen as the words blurred through her tears. Pregnant. A new life, created during Atticus's brief visit the previous month. A tiny heart already beating inside her. Their child. Her hand trembled as she reached for her phone, then hesitated. This wasn't news to share via text or even a video call. This was a moment that should be shared face to face, with intertwined hands and shared breath. She booked a flight to Seattle for the following week. It'll be a surprise, she told her mother, who was the only person she shared the news with. He's been working so hard. This will remind him what really matters. Margaret hugged her daughter tightly, not voicing her concerns about the growing distance between Fiona and Atticus. Every child is a blessing, she said instead. This little one might be exactly what you both need. If you're enjoying this story of love, loss, and redemption, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss another episode of Luxe Love Chronicles with Mr. Wentworth. In Seattle, Fiona took a cab from the airport to Frost Core headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel overlooking Puget Sound. The receptionist recognized her immediately. Mrs. Frost. We weren't expecting you. Mr. Frost is in a board meeting, but I can let him know you're here. I'd like to surprise him, if that's okay, Fiona said, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. The receptionist smiled knowingly. Of course. The meeting should be wrapping up soon. You can wait in his office. Atticus's office occupied the entire top floor, a minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows, dominated by a desk with multiple screens. No photographs. No personal touches. Nothing to suggest the man who worked there had a life outside these walls. Fiona placed a small gift bag on his desk, containing a pair of tiny hand-knitted booties she'd started making on the plane. Then she waited, watching Seattle's skyline as clouds gathered over the sound. An hour passed. Then 2. Finally, the elevator doors opened, and Atticus strode in, surrounded by executives in identical dark suits. He was mid-sentence, discussing implementation protocols, when he noticed her. Fiona, he said, surprise momentarily replacing his professional mask. I didn't know you were coming. Surprise, she said, her practiced speech suddenly forgotten as she took in how exhausted he looked. How distant, even now. Atticus turned to the executives. We'll continue this tomorrow. Please excuse us. Once they were alone, he approached her, placing a perfunctory kiss on her cheek. You should have told me you were coming. I would have cleared my schedule. That's not how surprises work, Fiona said, trying to keep her tone light. Besides, I have news that couldn't wait. Atticus glanced at his watch. I have a video conference with Tokyo in 20 minutes. Can we discuss over dinner? I'll have my assistant make reservations. Fiona felt something crack inside her. This isn't about dinner reservations, Atticus. This is about our future. Our family. He looked at her properly then, noticing the gift bag on his desk. What's going on? With trembling hands, she took the tiny booties from the bag and placed them in his palm. We're going to have a baby. Atticus froze, staring at the miniature shoes as if they were written in a language he couldn't comprehend. The color drained from his face. A baby, he repeated, the word flat and distant. Yes, Fiona said, the joy she'd been nurturing giving way to uncertainty. I'm about 6 weeks along, due in early spring. Atticus set the booties down carefully, as if they might detonate. He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back, shoulders rigid. The timing isn't ideal, he said finally. Frost Core is at a critical juncture. The international expansion, the new AI division. I'm working 20-hour days. I know, Fiona said, her voice small. But babies don't plan themselves around corporate expansions. This is happening, Atticus. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. What are you expecting to happen here? That I'll move back to Savannah? That you'll move to Seattle? We haven't resolved the basic question of where we'll live together, and now you're adding a child to the equation. This isn't an equation, Fiona said, heat rising in her cheeks. This is our baby. A life we created together. Atticus ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare gesture of discomposure. I need time to process this. To make adjustments to my plans. The distance between them, once measured in miles, now seemed to span galaxies. Fiona looked at the man she'd married, brilliant, driven, remarkable, and wondered if she'd ever really known him at all. Some things can't be processed in spreadsheets and algorithms, she said quietly. Some things just need to be felt. But Atticus Frost had built an empire by controlling variables, not feeling them. And in that moment, as his assistant's voice announced the Tokyo call was waiting, Fiona saw the future stretching before them like parallel lines that would never intersect. 3 days later, Atticus appeared at the door of Fiona's Savannah apartment. She'd returned home the morning after their disastrous reunion, unable to bear the sterile emptiness of his Seattle penthouse or the growing coldness between them. We need to talk, he said, standing stiffly in her colorful living space, looking as out of place as a wolf in a butterfly garden. Fiona nodded, gesturing to the couch draped with one of her hand-woven throws. She'd been sick that morning, her first bout of morning sickness, and felt hollow and vulnerable. Atticus remained standing. I've been doing a lot of thinking about our situation. Our situation, Fiona repeated. You mean our marriage? Our baby. Yes. He paced the small room, hands clasped behind his back like a general planning strategy. I've run the calculations from every angle. The timing, the logistics, the practical implications. Something cold settled in Fiona's stomach that had nothing to do with morning sickness. And what did your calculations tell you? Atticus stopped pacing and looked at her directly, his expression clinically detached. I can't be a father right now. Perhaps not ever. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and final. What exactly are you saying? Fiona asked, her voice barely audible. I'm saying that I'm not equipped for fatherhood. My work requires total commitment. The company is at a critical inflection point. Thousands of employees rely on my leadership. Millions of users depend on our security protocols. He spoke rapidly, as if reciting prepared notes. Children need stability, consistency, and emotional availability. Those aren't resources I can allocate right now. Resources, Fiona whispered. Our child isn't a line item in your budget, Atticus. That's exactly my point, he continued. I don't think about these things the way a father should. I don't feel things the way a father should. Fiona stood, anger finally breaking through her shock. So what? You're just abandoning us? Your wife and your child? A flicker of something, pain? Regret? Crossed his face before the mask returned. I'll provide financial support, of course. You'll want for nothing. But I can't pretend I can be the husband and father you deserve. You made vows to me, Fiona said, tears streaming down her face now. Under the magnolia tree. You promised we would always find our way back to each other. I was wrong, Atticus said simply. Some equations don't have elegant solutions. In that moment, something shattered inside Fiona, not just her heart, but her faith in the man she'd married. The brilliant mind she'd admired now seemed coldly alien. The hands that had held hers so tenderly now seemed incapable of cradling a child. Get out, she whispered. Atticus nodded once, as if he'd expected this response. He placed an envelope on her coffee table. This contains documentation for a trust fund I've established in your name. It should cover any expenses for you and the child. We don't want your money, Fiona said, her voice stronger now. We want you. But I guess that's the one thing the great Atticus Frost can't provide. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. For a moment, he seemed on the verge of saying something more. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and walked out, closing the door quietly behind him. Fiona collapsed onto the couch, hands cradling her stomach where their child grew, unaware that its father had just calculated it out of his life. Outside, rain began to fall on Savannah's cobblestone streets, washing away the last traces of summer warmth. 2 weeks after Atticus walked out of her life, Fiona sat in her obstetrician's office, trying to focus on the doctor's words through her fog of grief and morning sickness. I'd like to do an ultrasound today, Dr. Patel said gently. Your HCG levels are unusually high for 8 weeks along. I just want to make sure everything is developing normally. Fiona nodded numbly. The past 2 weeks had passed in a blur. She hadn't heard from Atticus again. She'd returned the envelope unopened. Her parents knew something was wrong but didn't press when she said she wasn't ready to talk about it. The ultrasound room was dimly lit and peaceful. Fiona lay back on the table, lifting her shirt to expose her still flat stomach. The gel was cold against her skin. Dr. Patel moved the wand slowly, her expression professional but increasingly surprised. She adjusted some settings, moved the wand again, and then looked at Fiona with widened eyes. "Ms. Adair," she said carefully. "I'm detecting multiple heartbeats." Fiona blinked, not comprehending. "Multiple? You mean twins?" Dr. Patel turned the screen so Fiona could see. "Not twins." She pointed to the screen. 1, 2, 3, and 4. "You're carrying quadruplets." The room seemed to spin around Fiona. "Quadruplets? But how? We don't have multiples in either family." "Spontaneous quadruplets are extremely rare," Dr. Patel agreed. "But they do happen. And in your case, they definitely have happened." 4 tiny heartbeats. For tiny lives growing inside her. For children she would raise alone. "This significantly changes your pregnancy journey," Dr. Patel continued, her voice gentle but serious. "Multiple pregnancies carry higher risks. You'll need specialized care, more frequent monitoring. Your activity will likely be restricted as you progress." Fiona nodded, still staring at the screen where 4 distinct sacs were visible, each containing a tiny fluttering heartbeat. "What about my work?" she asked finally. "My shop." Dr. Patel's expression was sympathetic. "By the 2nd trimester, you'll likely need to significantly reduce your working hours. By the 3rd, you may need bed rest. Multiple pregnancies rarely go full term. We'll aim for 32 to 34 weeks if possible." The implications crashed over Fiona in waves. Southern Threads couldn't run itself. Her online orders had been increasing, but the shop was her primary income. And now she wasn't having 1 baby but 4. "I understand this is overwhelming news," Dr. Patel said, handing Fiona tissues to wipe the gel from her stomach. "I'm going to refer you to a maternal fetal medicine specialist who works with high-risk pregnancies. But first, is there someone you can call? The father, perhaps, her family?" Fiona thought of Atticus, who had walked away from 1 baby. What would he do if he knew about 4? She thought of her aging parents, already struggling with her father's health issues. "I'll be fine," she said, straightening her shoulders. "I just need some time to process." As she left the doctor's office, Fiona placed her hand on her stomach. "Looks like it's just me and you 4 against the world," she whispered. "But don't worry. I've got enough love for all of you." By her 4th month of pregnancy, Fiona's life had transformed completely. Her body, once slender and energetic, now strained to support 4 growing babies. The specialized maternal fetal medicine team monitored her closely, concerned about her rapid weight gain, rising blood pressure, and symptoms of hyperemesis gravidarum, severe morning sickness that left her dehydrated and weak. "You need to reduce stress and physical activity," her specialist insisted during a checkup. "These babies are competing for resources. Your body is working 4 times as hard." But Southern Threads demanded her attention. The holiday season was approaching, typically her busiest time. Online orders piled up. Custom quilts remained half-finished on her loom. She tried hiring part-time help, but the intricate nature of her handcrafted work made it difficult to delegate. The medical bills began to mount. Even with insurance, the specialized care for a quadruplet pregnancy generated thousands in out-of-pocket expenses. Weekly ultrasounds, specialized tests, preventative medications, each added to the growing stack of invoices on her desk. One Tuesday morning, Fiona fainted while organizing inventory. Her assistant found her unconscious on the shop floor and called an ambulance. She woke in the hospital to the sound of 4 strong heartbeats on the monitor and a doctor's stern face. "Bed rest," he said firmly. "Starting now. Your blood pressure is dangerously high. You're showing early signs of preeclampsia. If you don't drastically reduce your activity, you risk losing these babies." Tears streamed down Fiona's face. "But my shop, my livelihood." "Your life and your baby's lives are what matter now," the doctor replied. "Everything else can be rebuilt." The decision was made for her. With a heavy heart, Fiona closed Southern Thread's physical location. She tried to maintain the online store from her bed, but managing shipments and communications became increasingly difficult as her pregnancy progressed and her health declined. By her 6th month, carrying 4 growing babies, Fiona could barely move without assistance. Her parents helped as much as they could, but her father's arthritis was worsening, and her mother was stretched thin caring for both her husband and daughter. The final blow came when her landlord sold the building that housed both Southern Threads and her apartment. The new owners planned renovations and doubled the rent. With her business essentially shuttered and medical bills consuming her savings, Fiona couldn't afford the increase. "You could call him," her mother suggested gently one evening, helping Fiona pack her remaining inventory into boxes. "He should know. He should help." Fiona shook her head firmly. "Atticus made his choice. He calculated us out of his life. I won't go begging for what should be freely given. Pride, perhaps, but also protection. If Atticus wouldn't embrace one child with love, she wouldn't expose four to potential rejection." As her due date approached, Fiona sold most of her equipment and supplies. Her beautiful looms, her vintage sewing machines, her carefully curated fabric collection, each sale a small heartbreak, each dollar precious for what lay ahead. By her 7th month, with her apartment no longer available and her parents' home unsuitable for her needs, Fiona faced the unthinkable: homelessness, just weeks before her babies would arrive. The New Life Women's Shelter occupied a former church on the outskirts of Savannah. Its stained glass windows filtered sunlight into rainbow patterns across worn wooden floors. In another life, Fiona might have found it beautiful, might have been inspired to capture those colors in one of her textile pieces. Now, it was simply shelter, a place that didn't turn away a heavily pregnant woman with nowhere else to go. "We typically have a 30-day limit," the shelter director, Mrs. Washington, explained gently as she showed Fiona to a small room with 2 twin beds. "But given your circumstances, we'll make an exception. You can stay until after the babies are born and you're stabilized." Fiona nodded gratefully, lowering herself carefully onto the bed. At 30 weeks pregnant with quadruplets, her body felt impossibly stretched and heavy. The shelter wasn't equipped for someone in her condition, but they'd rearranged furniture to accommodate her needs and found a volunteer nurse who checked on her daily. Her parents visited every day, bringing home-cooked meals and what comfort they could offer. Her mother had tears in her eyes the first time she saw Fiona in the shelter. "This isn't right," Margaret whispered. "My daughter shouldn't be in a homeless shelter." "It's temporary," Fiona assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at her. What would happen after the babies were born? Where would they go? How would she care for 4 infants when she could barely care for herself? Comment below with a heart if Fiona's strength moves you, and share what you would do in her impossible situation. The days blurred together. Fiona's world contracted to the small room, the bathroom down the hall that required painful waddles to reach, the common area where other women in crisis shared meals and stories. Some were running from abuse. Others battled addiction. All carried burdens visible or invisible. In this place of rock bottom, Fiona found an unexpected community. Jayla, a young mother of 2 who'd escaped an abusive relationship, braided Fiona's hair when she couldn't raise her arms to do it herself. Eleanor, a retired nurse now homeless after medical bills claimed her savings, checked Fiona's blood pressure and swollen ankles daily. Mrs. Washington ensured Fiona had extra pillows to support her enormous belly and arranged transportation to medical appointments. "You're not alone, Mrs. Washington told her one evening, catching Fiona crying silently in the common room. "These babies will have a village." But as her due date approached, fear consumed Fiona's nights. Her doctors warned that quadruplets typically arrived early, that they would likely need time in the NICU. Those complications were not just possible but probable. In those dark hours, Fiona sometimes allowed herself to imagine Atticus beside her. His brilliant mind focused on research about multiple births, his resources ensuring the best possible care, his hand holding hers through contractions. Then morning would come, and reality with it. The father of her children had chosen his empire over his family. Her business was gone. Her home was gone. Her independent life was gone. All that remained was the fierce love for the 4 lives depending on her, and the determination that somehow they would not just survive but thrive. Even if she had to rebuild their world from nothing. At 32 weeks, in the pre-dawn hours of a stormy March morning, Fiona's water broke. The volunteer nurse called an ambulance while Mrs. Washington contacted Fiona's parents. "It's too early," Fiona whispered, fear clutching at her throat as contractions gripped her body. "They need more time." But time waited for no one, especially not for impatient babies determined to enter the world. The hospital had been prepared for this moment. As one of the few quadruplet pregnancies in the region, Fiona's case had drawn attention from specialists. A team assembled quickly: obstetricians, neonatologists, nurses, anesthesiologists, all focused on bringing 4 tiny lives safely into the world. "Your blood pressure is concerning," her doctor explained as they wheeled her toward the operating room. "We need to perform an emergency C-section." Margaret arrived just in time to squeeze her daughter's hand before they took her into surgery. "I'll be waiting." "We all will. You're not alone." The operating room was blindingly bright, crowded with medical personnel. Fiona trembled on the table, partly from medication, partly from fear. The anesthesiologist explained what was happening as the spinal block took effect, numbing her from the chest down. "You'll feel pressure but no pain," he assured her. "And very soon, you'll meet your babies." A blue drape separated Fiona from the surgical field. A kind-faced nurse held her hand, describing what was happening beyond the barrier. The minutes stretched and compressed simultaneously, reality bending around the miracle unfolding. "First baby coming," the doctor announced. "It's a girl." A tiny, indignant cry pierced the room. Tears streamed down Fiona's face as the nurse held the swaddled infant near her face for a brief moment before whisking her to the waiting neonatal team. "Second baby, another girl." Another cry joined the first. "Third baby, a girl." "Fourth baby, and it's a girl." For beautiful girls, Ms. Adair. For daughters. For perfectly formed, tiny miracles, each weighing just under 3 pounds, each with a shock of copper hair like their mothers. The neonatal teams worked efficiently, assessing, stabilizing, preparing them for transfer to the NICU. "Can I touch them?" Fiona asked, her voice breaking. "Please, just for a moment." The nurses brought each swaddled baby close enough for Fiona to press a gentle kiss to their foreheads before they were taken away for critical care. "They're fighters," the neonatologist assured her. "Small but strong. They've got excellent lung function for their gestational age." As they wheeled Fiona to recovery, exhaustion and emotion overwhelmed her. She had done it. She had carried these 4 precious lives against impossible odds. They were here, they were breathing, they were real. In the quiet recovery room, as medication dulled the pain of her incision and her parents waited to see her, Fiona made 4 silent promises to her daughters. They would never know want. They would never feel abandoned. They would never doubt her love. And they would know their worth came from within, not from what anyone else, even their father, thought of them. For promises as sacred as the 4 lives she just brought into the world. 9 months after walking away from Fiona, Atticus Frost stood at the pinnacle of his professional success. Frost Core had successfully expanded into international markets. Their quantum encryption technology was now the global standard for secure communications. The company's valuation had tripled. Fortune magazine had just named him Visionary of the Year. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt hollow. His Seattle penthouse had been featured in Architectural Digest, all clean lines, smart technology, and minimalist design. The article praised its perfect functionality and uncompromising efficiency. No one mentioned that it felt as sterile as a laboratory, that it had never contained laughter, that no one had ever called it home. Atticus worked 18-hour days, slept rarely, and ate only when his assistant reminded him. His board members noticed the dark circles under his eyes, his increasing impatience, his razor-thin margin for error. "You need a break," his COO suggested after a particularly tense board meeting. "You've achieved everything we set out to do this year. Take some time." "Time for what?" Atticus had replied flatly. That night, alone in his penthouse, Atticus found himself staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. At 34, he looked a decade older. His eyes, once sharp with ambition, now held a haunted quality he couldn't name. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to think of Fiona, of her copper hair spread across their pillow, of her laugh that seemed to come from some deep well of joy he'd never accessed himself, of the tiny hand-knit booties he'd left behind on his desk that day. Their child would have been born by now. The thought hit him with unexpected force, nearly buckling his knees. Somewhere in the world, his child existed, was breathing, was growing. Without him, had Fiona kept the baby? Was it a boy or girl? Did it have his dark hair or her copper curls? His analytical mind or her creative spirit? He'd never allowed himself these questions before. He'd sealed them away, compartmentalized them like troublesome code that interfered with primary functions. Atticus walked to his home office and unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside lay the envelope Fiona had returned, unopened. The trust fund documents he'd established, rejected. And beneath them, a photograph he'd never shown anyone. Fiona beneath the magnolia tree on their wedding day, laughing at something beyond the frame, sunlight in her hair, joy radiating from her like visible light. For the first time since walking away, Atticus Frost felt the full weight of what he'd calculated out of his life, and found the sum to be unbearable. The charity gala was Atticus's least favorite obligation. Hundreds of wealthy people in formal wear, making small talk and performative philanthropy while photographers captured it all for social media. But as Frost Corps' CEO, his presence was expected at these events, especially when the company was being honored for its STEM education initiatives. He was at the bar, ordering sparkling water, when he heard a familiar accent, the gentle southern drawl that still haunted his dreams. "Another sweet tea, please." Atticus turned, his heart racing, but it wasn't Fiona. This woman was older, with silver threading through dark hair. Yet something in her features seemed vaguely familiar. "Beth." The woman beside her touched her arm. "Isn't that?" The first woman looked up, noticed Atticus, and her expression hardened. She whispered something to her companion, then approached him directly. "Atticus Frost," she said, with no warmth in her voice. "I wondered if our paths would ever cross." Atticus searched her face, trying to place her. "I'm sorry, have we met?" "I'm Elizabeth Turner. I taught with Patrick Adair for 20 years. I was at your wedding." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Though I notice you weren't at the hospital when his daughter needed you." The reference to Fiona hit him like a physical blow. Is Fiona all right?" Elizabeth's expression registered surprise, then calculation. "You really don't know, do you?" "Know what?" Atticus felt a chill spread through him. Elizabeth seemed to debate with herself, then made a decision. "Fiona nearly died bringing your children into the world. 4 of them. Identical quadruplets. All girls. They spent weeks in the NICU while she recovered from eclampsia." The room tilted around Atticus. He gripped the bar to steady himself. "Quadruplets," he whispered. 4. "For daughters you've never met," Elizabeth confirmed, her voice low but cutting. "For little miracles who cost Fiona everything, her health, her business, her home. She was living in a shelter when they were born." A shelter. The word sliced through Atticus like a blade. Fiona, his Fiona, who'd created beauty with her hands and shared it with the world, had been homeless. While he'd been accepting awards and expanding his empire, the mother of his children had been fighting for survival. "Where are they now?" he managed to ask, his voice strained beyond recognition. "Still at the shelter. The New Life Women's Center in Savannah." Fiona had nowhere else to go after the hospital. Her parents help when they can, but Patrick's health is failing. Elizabeth's eyes bored into his. "Those little girls are 7 months old now. They've never known their father." Fiona works odd jobs sewing and mending when the babies are asleep, trying to save enough for a security deposit on an apartment. Shame crashed over Atticus in waves. Not the mild embarrassment of a social faux pas or a failed project, but soul-deep shame that stripped away every defense and justification he'd built. "Does she?" He cleared his throat. "Would she want to see me?" Elizabeth's laugh was without humor. "What do you think? You abandoned her when she told you about one baby. She carried 4 to term alone, nearly died bringing them into the world, and has been raising them in poverty while you've been featured in Fortune magazine." She gathered her purse, preparing to leave, then paused. "Those girls look just like you, by the way. Same dark hair. Same serious expressions. Same way of studying everything around them, like they're cataloging the world." Her voice softened slightly. "They're extraordinary children. If you have any humanity in you at all, you'll make this right." As Elizabeth walked away, Atticus stood frozen, the ground having shifted beneath his feet. His carefully calculated world had just been upended by a single, inescapable truth. He wasn't just a father. He was the father of 4. 3 days later, Atticus stood across the street from the New Life Women's Shelter in Savannah, rain soaking through his expensive coat. The former church looked well-maintained but modest, its stained glass windows glowing softly in the gray afternoon light. In the small fenced yard beside the building, a group of women sat watching children play despite the drizzle. And there, beneath a small covered porch, was Fiona. Even from a distance, he could see how much she'd changed. Her once vibrant copper hair was pulled back severely, her face thinner, her posture showing the strain of constant caregiving. She sat in a rocking chair, a baby in her arms, while 3 identical infants played on a blanket at her feet. For tiny girls. For little lives with his blood running through their veins. For daughters he'd never held. As Atticus watched, one of the babies on the blanket began to fuss. Fiona somehow managed to lift her with one arm while still holding the first child. Her movements showed the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to care for multiple infants simultaneously, without help. She sang something to them, her voice carrying faintly across the street, a lullaby his own mother had never sung to him. The scene cracked something open inside Atticus, a chamber of his heart he'd kept sealed and ignored. These weren't abstract concepts or theoretical responsibilities. These were real human beings, vulnerable and innocent, carrying his genetic code, but none of his wealth or privilege. And Fiona, the woman who'd once shown him what it meant to truly connect with another person, was shouldering a burden that would crush most people, with grace and determination that humbled him completely. What would you do if you discovered you had 4 children you never knew about? Hit like and comment below. Atticus stepped back into the shadow of a live oak as a social worker emerged from the shelter to help Fiona gather the babies for their afternoon nap. He wasn't ready to approach yet. Not until he had a plan. Not until he could offer more than hollow apologies and belated support. For the first time in his life, Atticus Frost realized that his brilliant mind and vast resources were utterly inadequate to the task before him. No algorithm could undo his abandonment. No financial arrangement could compensate for months of absence. No logical argument could justify his choices. Back in his hotel room, Atticus made phone calls, rearranged schedules, and set wheels in motion. Frostcore would run without him for a while. His executive team would handle the day-to-day operations. The board would receive his temporary step-back plan in the morning. Then he sat at the desk and began to write. Not code, not business strategy, but a letter to Fiona. He wrote and discarded a dozen versions, each sounding more hollow than the last. How could words possibly bridge the chasm he had created? In the end, he wrote only what was true. I failed you in every way a man can fail. I don't deserve forgiveness, but our daughters deserve a father. Please give me the chance to become the man they need me to be. The following morning, Atticus waited on a bench across from the shelter, watching as women came and went. Some headed to jobs, others to appointments. All carried the visible weight of difficult circumstances. At precisely 10 a.m., Fiona emerged, pushing a custom-made quadruplet stroller, clearly donated or secondhand, but functional. She wore simple jeans and a faded t-shirt, her copper hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Even in such plain attire, she took his breath away. Atticus stood, his carefully rehearsed words evaporating. As Fiona guided the stroller down the ramp, he stepped forward into her path. She saw him and froze, color draining from her face. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across 6 feet of sidewalk and 9 months of absence. Atticus, she finally said, her voice barely audible. What are you doing here? I came to see you, he replied, then glanced at the stroller. And them. Fiona's hands tightened on the stroller handle, her knuckles whitening. How did you find us? Elizabeth Turner. I met her at a charity event in Seattle. Understanding dawned in Fiona's eyes, followed quickly by wariness. So now you know? Now I know, he agreed. Fiona, He took a step toward her, but she immediately backed away. Don't, she said sharply. You don't get to walk back into our lives just because your curiosity is piqued. These girls have been growing and thriving for 7 months without you. Atticus nodded, accepting the rebuke. You're right. I have no right to be here, but I'm asking you to let me see them. To let me help. Help? Fiona's laugh was brittle. Now you want to help? Where was your help when I was on bed rest, losing my business? Where was your help when I was homeless and 8 months pregnant? Where was your help during the 6 weeks they spent in the NICU? Each question hit him like a physical blow. I didn't know, he said quietly. You didn't want to know, Fiona corrected. There's a difference. One of the babies in the stroller began to fuss, then another. Fiona immediately knelt beside them, her attention shifting from Atticus to the children with practiced ease. She murmured softly to them, adjusting blankets and offering a teething toy to the fussiest one. Atticus watched, mesmerized by the tiny faces peering up from the stroller. 4 identical little girls, each with his dark hair and eyes, but Fiona's delicate features. They were beautiful in a way that defied his analytical mind, perfect combinations of himself and the woman he'd abandoned. What are their names? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Fiona looked up, surprised by the question. Something in his expression must have reached her, because after a moment's hesitation, she answered. Madeline, Eleanor, Charlotte, and Rose. She pointed to each one as she named them. They're identical, but not to me. Maddie is the oldest and most serious. Ellie is the curious one. Charlie is our little fighter. She was the smallest at birth, but has the biggest personality. And Rosie is the peacemaker. Atticus knelt slowly, keeping a respectful distance, but trying to see his daughters more clearly. They're extraordinary, he said softly. Yes, they are, Fiona agreed, a fierce pride in her voice. And they've been my whole world since the day I found out about them. Fiona, Atticus said, meeting her eyes. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I'm asking anyway. Let me help. Not just financially, but in whatever way you'll allow. These girls deserve better than a shelter, and you deserve better than what I did to you. Fiona studied him, her green eyes searching his face for sincerity or manipulation. The Atticus she'd known had always calculated his moves several steps ahead. She was looking for the strategy, the angle. Why now? She asked simply. Because I finally understand what I threw away, he answered. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right, if you'll let me. No, Fiona said, rising to her feet and gripping the stroller handle. I won't upend their lives because you've had a sudden attack of conscience. We're managing fine without you. She began pushing the stroller down the sidewalk, her back straight despite the weight of her burden. Atticus walked beside her, keeping a respectful distance. The shelter has a 30-day limit, he said quietly. Elizabeth told me you've been there for months only because of special circumstances. Fiona's steps faltered slightly before she regained her rhythm. I'm saving for an apartment. I just need a little more time. Let me help, Atticus repeated. Not for me. For them. I don't want your money, Atticus. Then let me earn my place, he countered. Not as your husband. Not even as their father yet. Just as someone who wants to help make their lives better. Fiona stopped at a small park and maneuvered the stroller to a bench. The babies were getting fussy again, ready for their bottles. With practiced efficiency, she began preparing 4 bottles from supplies in the stroller's storage compartment. May I? Atticus asked, gesturing to the bottles. After a moment's hesitation, Fiona handed him one. Support her head, she instructed as she lifted Madeline from the stroller. And tilt the bottle so she doesn't get too much air. Atticus carefully lifted the baby Fiona indicated was Eleanor. The tiny weight of his daughter in his arms hit him with unexpected emotional force. She looked up at him with solemn dark eyes, his eyes, studying his face with an intensity that belied her infancy. Hello, Eleanor, he said softly, his voice unsteady. I'm your father. Eleanor accepted the bottle, still watching him curiously. Across from him, Fiona juggled Madeline and Charlotte, while Rose waited patiently in the stroller, gnawing on a teething toy. They're 7 months old, Fiona said, breaking the silence. They're starting on solid foods. They can sit up on their own. Maddie's trying to crawl. They babble constantly to each other. I swear they have their own language. I've missed so much, Atticus said, the realization cutting deep. Yes, Fiona agreed simply. You have. When the babies were fed and settled back in the stroller, Fiona turned to Atticus. I need to get them back for their nap. The shelter has strict schedules. Fiona, please, Atticus said, his carefully constructed walls crumbling. Tell me what I can do to be part of their lives. To make things better for all of you. Fiona studied him, weighing his sincerity against her daughter's well-being. You walked away so easily before. How do I know you won't do it again when it gets difficult? Because I promise you, raising quadruplets is the hardest thing I've ever done. I won't walk away, he vowed. Test me. Give me the most mundane, difficult tasks. Let me prove I'm not the same man who left you. Something in his desperation must have reached her, because after a long moment, Fiona nodded once. The shelter needs maintenance work. The code playground equipment is broken, and the children's room needs painting. If you want to help, start there. It wasn't what he'd expected, not access to his daughters or forgiveness for his mistakes. But it was a beginning, a chance to demonstrate through actions rather than words that he was committed to change. I'll be there tomorrow morning, Atticus promised. And every day after that, for as long as it takes. Fiona's expression remained guarded, but she nodded again before turning to guide the stroller back toward the shelter, leaving Atticus standing alone with the weight of promise and possibility resting squarely on his shoulders. For 2 weeks, Atticus showed up at the shelter every morning at 8 a.m. sharp, dressed not in his usual bespoke suits, but in work clothes suitable for manual labor. He repaired code playground equipment, painted the children's room in cheerful colors, fixed leaking faucets, and upgraded the shelter's outdated computer systems. The shelter residents regarded him with curiosity and suspicion at first, then gradual acceptance as his consistent presence became familiar. Mrs. Washington, the shelter director, watched him with knowing eyes but said little beyond giving instructions for each day's tasks. Fiona maintained her distance, but allowed him brief interactions with the quadruplets during their morning outings to the park. He learned their distinct personalities, Madeline's thoughtful observation, Eleanor's insatiable curiosity, Charlotte's determined energy, and Rose's gentle sweetness. Each moment with them was precious, each smile or coo stored carefully in his memory to replace the months he'd lost. On the 15th day, Atticus arrived at the shelter to find it in chaos. Fiona was nowhere to be seen, and Mrs. Washington was organizing volunteers to care for the quadruplets, who were fussing in their playpen. "What's happened?" Atticus asked, alarm rising in his throat. "Patrick collapsed this morning," Mrs. Washington explained quickly. "Possible stroke. Fiona's at Memorial Hospital with her mother. I'm trying to find someone who can watch all 4 girls, but it's challenging." Without hesitation, Atticus stepped forward. "I'll take them." Mrs. Washington eyed him skeptically. "All 4? By yourself? Have you ever cared for them alone before?" "No," Atticus admitted. "But I'm their father, and Fiona needs to be with her parents right now." After a moment's consideration, Mrs. Washington nodded. "I'll help you gather their supplies. They need consistency and routine." An hour later, Atticus found himself at Memorial Hospital, pushing the quadruplet stroller with one hand and carrying a diaper bag with the other. He'd never felt more out of his depth, not during his first coding competition, not while defending his dissertation, not while taking Frostcore public. He found Fiona in the ICU waiting room, her face tear-streaked and pale. Margaret sat beside her, looking equally shattered. "Atticus," Fiona said, confusion cutting through her grief as she saw him with the babies. "What are you doing here?" "You need to be with your father," he said simply. "I've got them. However long it takes." "Whatever you need." For the first time since his return, Fiona's guard dropped completely. With a sob, she fell against his chest, her tears soaking his shirt as he held her with his free arm, their daughters between them like a bridge spanning 9 months of absence. Patrick Adair survived his stroke, but the road to recovery would be long. As Fiona divided her time between the hospital and the shelter, Atticus stepped fully into the role of caregiver for their daughters. The learning curve was steep and humbling. The brilliant mind that had revolutionized quantum computing struggled with the logistics of quadruplet diaper changes. The hands that had coded elegant algorithms fumbled with tiny buttons on infant clothing. The CEO who commanded thousands of employees was routinely outwitted by 4 7-month-olds with synchronized crying schedules. But he persisted, with Mrs. Washington's guidance and occasional FaceTime consultations with Margaret. He learned each daughter's preferences. Madeline liked to be swaddled tightly, Eleanor needed constant stimulation, Charlotte would only sleep with a specific blue pacifier, and Rose calmed immediately when sung to. "You're getting better at this," Fiona observed one evening, returning from the hospital to find all 4 girls fed, bathed, and sleeping peacefully in their cribs. "They're excellent teachers," Atticus replied, exhaustion evident in his voice but satisfaction in his eyes. "Very clear feedback mechanisms when I get something wrong." A small smile tugged at Fiona's lips, the first he'd seen since his return. "They don't allow for coding errors." "No debugging allowed," he agreed, matching her smile with his own. Small moments of connection began to accumulate. Shared relief when Charlotte finally took a bottle after refusing for hours. Quiet laughter when Eleanor discovered her reflection and engaged in serious conversation with herself. Wordless coordination as they managed the complex choreography of caring for quadruplets in a small shelter room. As Patrick stabilized and began rehabilitation, Atticus approached Fiona with a proposition. "I've found a house," he said carefully. 4 bedrooms, wheelchair accessible, close to the hospital and your parents. I've arranged for around-the-clock nursing care for your father once he's discharged." Fiona's guard immediately returned. "Atticus." "It's not manipulation," he interrupted gently. "It's not conditional. The house will be in your name only. Your parents can live with you, or nearby, whatever works best for their care and your independence. The girls need space to grow. You need stability to rebuild." "Why are you doing this?" Fiona asked, the question that had lingered between them for weeks. Atticus considered his answer carefully. Because it's right. Because they deserve it. Because you deserve it. He paused. And selfishly, because I want to be near them. Near you. Not to reclaim what I threw away, but to earn something new, if that's ever possible. Fiona studied him, searching for the calculation behind the offer. Finding none, she nodded once. I'll think about it. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. And for now, that was enough. The house was perfect. A historic Savannah home with a wide front porch, recently renovated for accessibility, with a detached guest house where Patrick and Margaret could maintain independence while staying close. Fiona moved in with the Quadruplets just before their 8th month, her parents joining them once Patrick was discharged from rehabilitation. Atticus took a small apartment nearby, close enough to help daily but respectful of the boundaries Fiona had established. He adjusted his work schedule dramatically, handling Frost's core responsibilities remotely during the girls' nap times and after they were asleep. One evening, while the babies played on a blanket in the living room, Atticus noticed Fiona sketching in a notebook, designs for textile pieces, her artistic instinct still alive despite everything. You should restart Southern Threads, he said. Fiona looked up, surprised. I can barely manage the girls. A business isn't realistic right now. What if it could be? Atticus asked. The guest house has a perfect space for a studio. I've researched equipment that would allow you to work more efficiently than before. And I've spoken with 3 graduate students from SCAD who are interested in apprenticeships. Fiona's expression shifted from surprise to wariness. I can't afford any of that. It would be an investment, not a gift, Atticus clarified. Southern Threads had a strong reputation and loyal customer base. With the right support, it could be rebuilt as a sustainable business that works with your life as a mother, not against it. An investment implies expectation of return, Fiona pointed out. The only return I expect is seeing you reconnect with your passion, Atticus said simply. I've watched you with the girls. You're an extraordinary mother. But you're also an artist. You shouldn't have to choose. Fiona was quiet for a long moment, watching the Quadruplets play. Finally, she said, I'll consider it. But it would be my business. My vision. I wouldn't want it any other way, Atticus agreed. Another small step forward on the long road to rebuilding trust. By the Quadruplets' first birthday, new patterns had emerged. The girls were thriving, crawling, babbling, developing distinct personalities while maintaining the peculiar connection that only identical multiples share. Fiona had cautiously restarted Southern Threads from the converted guest house studio, focusing on online sales and limited custom work that accommodated her responsibilities as a mother. Atticus had found a balance between his role at Frostcore and his commitment to his daughters. He spent mornings with the girls, giving Fiona time in her studio. He handled remote work during nap times and evenings. 3 days a week, he flew to Seattle for in-person meetings, always returning by bedtime, never missing the goodnight ritual he'd come to cherish. Patrick continued his recovery, now able to sit with his granddaughters and read them stories. Margaret flourished in her role as grandmother, teaching Fiona family recipes and helping with childcare while respecting her daughter's authority as mother. The birthday celebration was simple but joyful, a small gathering in the backyard with balloons, a homemade cake, and 4 little girls in matching dresses Fiona had created. Atticus watched from a respectful distance as friends and neighbors celebrated his daughters, acutely aware of his tenuous position in their lives. If you believe in second chances, subscribe now to hear more stories of redemption and transformation. Later, as he helped clean up after the party, Atticus found Fiona on the porch swing, watching the sunset. Thank you for including me today, he said, sitting beside her but maintaining a careful distance. You're their father, Fiona replied simply. On paper, Atticus acknowledged. I'm still earning the right to that title in reality. Fiona was quiet for a moment, then said, You've been consistent. The girls light up when you arrive. That means something. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement of the new pattern they were carefully creating, not the marriage they'd lost, but a partnership focused on 4 little lives that connected them irrevocably. 6 months after the Quadruplets' first birthday, Atticus asked Fiona to join him for a walk. The girls were with Margaret for the afternoon, giving them a rare moment alone. Where are we going? Fiona asked as they strolled through Forsyth Park. Somewhere important, Atticus replied. He led her to a bench beneath a massive oak tree, not unlike the magnolia where he'd proposed years before. Once seated, he turned to face her directly. "Fiona, I've spent the past year trying to prove I'm not the man who walked away from you. I've tried to earn a place in our daughters' lives without presuming a place in yours." Fiona's expression was guarded, but not cold. "You've done that. What I haven't done," Atticus continued, "is tell you that I still love you, that I never stopped, that walking away from you was the greatest miscalculation of my life." He reached into his pocket and withdrew not a ring box, but a small fabric pouch handmade from the same material as their daughter's birthday dresses. "I'm not asking you to forget the past or to trust me completely. I'm asking for the chance to rebuild what we had, slowly and on your terms. This isn't a proposal of marriage, but a proposal of possibility." Inside the pouch was a simple silver key. "A key?" Fiona asked, confusion evident in her voice. "To a home I've purchased," Atticus explained. "Not to replace this one, but to be nearby. So I can be close to the girls and to you, while respecting your independence and the boundaries you need." Fiona held the key, emotions playing across her face. "You're not asking me to marry you again? I'm asking for the chance to earn that right," Atticus clarified. "One day at a time, one truth at a time, one moment of trust at a time." Fiona closed her hand around the key, tears welling in her eyes. "That," she said softly, "is the first proposal that's ever made sense." The girls' second birthday celebration was held in the garden between the two houses, Fiona's family home and Atticus's smaller cottage just through the shared gate. The quadruplets, now walking and talking and bursting with energy, moved freely between the spaces, equally at home in both. The past 6 months had seen careful, deliberate steps toward reconciliation. Weekly dinners as a family. Occasional evenings alone while Margaret and Patrick watched the girls. Honest conversations about the past and cautious hopes for the future. Trust rebuilt slowly, brick by brick, through consistent presence and unwavering commitment. The birthday cake, 4 small cakes, one for each girl to demolish in her own way, was cut amid laughter and photographs. Charlotte dove in face first, while Madeline carefully dissected hers. Eleanor examined every angle before tasting, and Rose offered bites to everyone before enjoying her own. As twilight fell and the girls grew sleepy, Fiona found herself standing beside Atticus, watching their daughters play with paper crowns on their heads. "They're happy," she said softly. "Truly happy." "Are you?" Atticus asked, the question that mattered most. Fiona's hand found his, fingers intertwining for the first time in years. "I'm getting there," she answered honestly. "We're getting there." 1 year later, beneath the ancient oak where Atticus had offered a key and a promise, they exchanged vows for the second time. The quadruplets, now 3 years old, served as flower girls, scattering petals with varying degrees of success and focus. This ceremony wasn't about reclaiming what was lost, but celebrating what had been found, the understanding that love isn't a calculation but a choice, made daily. That redemption comes not from grand gestures, but consistent presence. That family isn't built on perfect circumstances, but imperfect people choosing each other through difficulties. And that sometimes, the greatest success isn't measured in billions, but in the laughter of 4 little girls who know they are loved beyond measure. Thank you for joining me for this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Luxe Love Chronicles with Mr. Wentworth for more powerful stories that remind us what truly matters in life.